Welcome to the best of MBS, where you can enjoy some of the best interviews by Michael Bungay Stanier, author of The Coaching Habit and How to Begin.
Lots of people who are on this podcast with me, people I know a little bit, people I respect for their particular angle into this idea of we will get through this and how do you build resilience. And they may come from a military background or a financial background or a self-care background, and it's fantastic getting those perspectives. But nobody really I know is coming on this podcast who goes, look, what I do is I do resilience. I think about leadership and I think about resilience. So this guest is perfect for this conversation because this is a woman who is grounded in understanding resilience from an academic perspective. She has a PhD. From a corporate practical experience, she was head of executive leadership development at Nike, global leadership development at Cigna. She's an author or soon to be an author. She's got a new book coming out called Flourish or Fold, the 5 practices of particularly resilient people. So how perfect to get into this conversation. And I'm really excited to introduce you to Dr. Taryn Marie. So Taryn Marie, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. What an honor to be a guest of yours.
Well, you may be over egging the pudding there, but we'll go with it.
I don't know what it means to over egg a pudding. But...
It means to flatter me more than I deserve. You're right. That is a weird British. I inherited that from my father.
My favorite.
I don't think I even understand what that means, but we'll move along. Look, you know a lot about resilience, and here's my guess. I bet you see the flow of stuff that flows through popular culture about resilience, and I bet you there's some part of that irritates you. You look at it and going, nah, that's an old myth, that's an old story. I don't know who made that up, but it's wrong. Let's start by asking, what do we get wrong about resilience?
Yeah, well, you're right. Like, I'm convicted by your comment, which is, yes, I am not always in a place of my higher self.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm not in that place of my higher self and I see models that exist out there that just seem as though someone has just sort of made them up and put them on the shelf, there's part of me that's like, well, how do we know that works? How do we know what we're teaching people? And so, I think the first piece for me, coming from a research background, is having some kind of empirical evidence around what we're telling people creates resilience, promotes resilience, enhances resilience, that we haven't just taken a model and put together, 5 words that start with the same letter because we like alliteration.
Exactly.
It's a pet peeve of mine for sure. On the other hand, though, having a framework that helps us understand a concept like resilience is always helpful, kind of absent other things. But, I think the first thing is having an empirical or sort of a research base, right? That tells us that what we're investing in is going to be worth our time, right? I'll use a food analogy too. How about that? The juice is worth the squeeze, as they say.
I love that. I haven't heard that saying. It's okay. I'm over egging your pudding. You're squeezing the juice. There's a whole food theme developing nicely in this whole conversation.
Exactly. I love it. So that's, that's the first thing. And my work in resilience arose out of thinking, wow, resilience, that sounds like a really interesting concept. I'd like to know more about that. And, probably 12 or 15 years ago, I did what one does or one did, and I looked it up in the dictionary. What does this word mean?
Right.
And I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out what it meant. It was sort of a circular definition. To be resilient meant to demonstrate resilience, and resilience meant to be resilient. And I was like, but, so
that doesn't help. Yeah.
How, right? What's the practical element of this? And so, as I've spent now over a decade trying to understand the how, trying to understand how we can actually leverage this kind of high level concept of resilience and what that means for us as humans when we're in moments of challenge, change, and complexity, and putting some real research or some real kind of, teeth into understanding what those behaviors are. So the first thing is having an empirical or kind of a research base.
I love that. And I know that's the heart of your company, resilience leadership. But maybe I could even ask you this. How do you define resilience? I mean, if we're trying to get beyond the circular resilience as being more resilient, which is not that helpful, how do you talk about resilience?
Yeah. So there's the first, there's three kind of myths and truths of resilience. And I love your emphasis on talking about, what a concept is and what a concept is not.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first myth of resilience is this phrase that we use a lot in the English language, but we don't think about it a lot. And we talk a lot about bouncing back.
Right.
And so what resilience isn't is bouncing back.
Nice.
Because if we think about this from a personal lived experience, if we think about this from a neuropsychological experience, every experience that we have in our lives fundamentally and forever changes us in small and large ways.
Right.
And therefore, once we've had an experience, we don't go back to the way that we were before that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We never go back.
Right. You can never stand in the same river twice.
You can never stand in the same river twice. And so rather than thinking about bouncing back, because what this has also become is a relatively unhelpful phrase, because I've met with so many leaders and we're in the midst of this whole, sort of corona virus, global pandemic upheaval. What the heck is happening?
Exactly.
I have no template or, manual for this situation. People have talked about, well, I can't wait until we go back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm thinking normal has left the building at this stage.
Normal has left the building. Yeah, it's like, let's not go rushing back to normal before we know what about our normal is worth going back for.
Nice.
And one of the worst things that I think could happen in all of this, aside from, the incredible tax that this is putting on our healthcare system and the loss of human life and tragedy, I think the worst thing that could happen is that we would not allow ourselves to be changed by this.
So is resilience then about navigating change in a way that serves us rather than diminishes us?
So if resilience isn't bouncing back, what I believe, sort of relative to the, myths and truths, like a really simple phrase, is resilience is bouncing forward.
Nice.
Resilience is about understanding, making meaning out of what is happening, what has happened, and allowing ourselves to be, again, fundamentally and forever changed in ways that allow us to be both more compassionate and empathetic and to have more wisdom.
So I'm looking up at the ceiling here because I'm like, my brain's going 1,000 miles an hour figuring this out. So it feels, as you say, resilience is bouncing forward. You've got an element in there of recovery. It could be the bounds. An element there of progress, which is the forward piece, but there's an element there of learning as well, so that you see the lessons that are there, so that when you talk about more empathetic, more compassionate, for me, there's a way of going, this helps you grow your humanity as part of this as well.
Absolutely. And so, it's this idea of like bouncing forward versus bouncing back. It's a two-edged sword. On the one hand, there's grief and loss associated with not going back. We will lose things. We will lose businesses. We will lose friends. We will lose family members. We will lose parts of ourselves in this process. And it is right for us to grieve those losses. And we will also gain immensely from this. And that's what makes resilience so dynamic. That's what makes it a kaleidoscope in a way, because like so many things, it's not good or bad. It's both.
Taryn Marie, how do I find the right line between the light and the dark? Because you're talking about both of these things, the grief of what might be happening, during the coronavirus, but just in general in a tough time, but also that there's opportunity and there's something new emerging from that, just the nature of the system.
Sure.
But I can see how if you go too far into the dark, that is hard for you and hard for those around you. And if you go too far into the light, if you're too like, oh, this is amazing, I'm pivoting, I'm reinventing stuff, and look how good this is, look at the sun rising, you can be tone deaf and a little, I guess, inappropriate to those around you. And I know as I sit here in the moment, trying to find that sweet spot, that line through those two sides of seeing the situation is a hard thing for me right now. And I'm wondering what guidance you'd give me and others around that.
Yeah, I think it can be a bit of a moving target, but I would offer three things. The first thing that I would offer is the notion of the Stockdale paradox. Are you familiar with the Stockdale paradox? Yeah. So Jim Collins, I believe, popularized this paradox when he wrote Good to Great. And the Stockdale paradox is about Admiral Stockdale, who was held along with John McCain and others as a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War in what they called quote unquote, the Hanoi Hilton.
Yes.
But it was anything but,
of course. Yeah.
A nice place to be. And when they asked Stockdale about his time as a prisoner of war that lasted, over 3 years, but of course he didn't know that, right? I mean, you don't know how long it's going to go on.
Yeah.
And I think this is really salient to where we are today, because we also don't know how long this shelter in place and quarantine is going to go on. And so they said, okay, who are the people who were really adversely impacted by this? And he said, well, that's easy. It was the optimists. And they were like, sorry, what? Did we hear you correctly?
Exactly. It doesn't make sense, right? At the first blush, you're like, how's that possible? You want optimism.
Yeah. And so what he talked about is navigating this balance between faith, faith and realism, and having a realistic sense of what's happening, staying connected to the world, to your point earlier, right, of not seeming tone deaf. So finding a way to stay connected to what's happening in reality, and then also being able to balance that connection to reality with a sense of faith that things will get better.
Right.
And I think what that takes me into is the second of three things, which is a positive mindset at this time doesn't mean we're happy all the time.
Right. That's so important. I love that you said that. I'm going to say it again so people don't not hear it. Because like positive mindset doesn't mean being happy the whole time. It doesn't mean feeling all the feelings. It's it goes a little deeper than that.
Exactly. So the first thing is to balance faith and realism, right? To stay connected, and then to always have faith that things are going to get better. The second thing is to maintain a positive attitude. And what maintaining a positive attitude means is we're going to have tough days. We're going to have tough hours. We're going to have tough weeks, right? We have not seen the full complement of the
catastrophe.
I was going to
Yeah.
use the word destruction, and I was asking myself if that was the right word, right? Like, we have not seen the full complement of the sort of cataclysmic event
Mm-hmm.
before us at the time of this recording, and we will. And so in those tough days, right, we can cry, we can be angry, we can be despondent, we can pull the covers up over our head, and yet the only thing that we need to maintain is that we know that things will ultimately get better.
Right.
Even if they're not the way that we would like them to be today. And then I'd say the third thing is, I've talked a lot about finding purpose in the pause.
I love that phrase. What does it mean?
It means that another phrase that we use in the English language a lot without thinking about it is we say, sometimes more flippantly than I'd like, well, Michael, everything happens for a reason.
Oh, that drives me crazy.
Mm-hmm.
That phrase drives me crazy.
Same, right? And so the idea here is a reason is typically something that exists outside of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? However, when we make a sense of purpose for ourselves within this pause,
Yeah.
it means that we go internal as opposed to external.
Yes.
And we decide what meaning this has for us.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Now, you can't see it, but I'm kind of pounding my fist on the desk at this stage because I'm just going to rant for 1 minute in agreement with what you're saying. I agree completely with what you're saying, and I completely disagree with the statement everything happens for a purpose, because I take the opposite perspective, which is nothing happens for a purpose. It's random world events and small events and stuff happening all around you all the time. It's ridiculous to think there's a purpose behind everything that's happened, in my point of view. And you have every choice to respond to everything that's happening around you with purpose, with meaning, in a mindful way, in a way that says, this is the person I want to be in this moment. This is the choice I'm making as to how I respond in this moment. As man search for meaning, between stimulus and response, there's a moment, and that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I love that. That's one of my favorite quotes too. I'll tell you a personal story briefly about how I learned this.
Mm-hmm.
So probably about a decade ago now, a little longer, I was in an abusive marriage, and it was my first marriage. And it was obviously someone I loved dearly, otherwise I wouldn't have married him. And that marriage ended with him nearly strangling me to death. And for a long time after that, I was searching for a reason.
Sure.
I was trying to understand why, how even, someone I had loved and who said that they loved me would also try to kill me.
Yeah.
It didn't make sense. And I was asking that why question, and I was trying to find a reason outside of myself, until one day I realized no one else, including him, can answer this question for me. This is a meaning that I get to decide for myself, right? And anytime I think we face any kind of challenge or change or complexity, we have the power, we are in agency, we are in choice to decide what meaning we want to make of that experience, and then consequently what story or narrative we want to tell ourselves.
I love that. I mean, what you're pointing to is, that sense of agency, that sense of authoring your own life, and the power that comes with that, and the responsibility that comes with that. And also to push it even further, the guilt and sadness that comes with that. Because as you just said earlier on in this conversation, part of what you step into in this moment is a willingness to take ownership of choice. Like, I get to choose here. I get to be the author. I get to be in agency. And one of the people who I love, a writer called Peter Block, he says every time you make a choice, you feel guilt for the choice you didn't make, and you feel anxiety around did you make the right choice or not. That's part of the complex messiness of being an adult in your own life. And against that guilt and against that anxiety comes agency, comes responsibility, comes a sense of purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. And what I feel called to say at this moment in our conversation and also for our listeners is there's at times a subtle but important distinction between choice and control.
Oh, good. Take me into that. I'm curious about that.
Yeah. So I think what's happening right now with this notion of virus, right, is that for many of us, our notion of control and expectation has really been upended.
Right. That illusion's been stripped away nicely.
Yeah. It's not that we have lost control. It's that we never had it in the first place.
Right.
And but what we do have control over is, to your point, are things that exist within ourselves. So while we can't control the global environment, while we can't control the trajectory of this illness and a variety of other things, and oh, by the way, we never could, that was just an illusion. What we do have control over is ourselves, is the choices that we make, is our mindset, is how we show up, is how we speak to people, the type of language that we use, how we show up and parent our children, right? So recognizing what is within our power to influence and what is not, and the choices that we can make. Again, kind of going back to your point, right, around like, how do I sort of navigate this field of not being overly positive, but also not being sort of like sunk into darkness, right?
Yes.
Overall, we want to make choices that are ultimately going to make us better and not make us bitter.
Our time is ticking away, and I've got a question I'd love to ask you. It shifts the focus just a little bit.
Okay.
But one of the things I know to be true about you is that when you were doing your pre- and postdoctoral fellowships, part of what you were doing was investigating the systemic impact of brain and spinal cord injury on people, but not just on patients, but also the impact on their significant family members and relationships.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we've been touching on so far in the conversation has been kind of us individually and our approach to control and awareness and resilience. But I'd love you to talk briefly, if you wouldn't mind, around what role community and connection has around helping us be more resilient.
Yeah. What role community and connection has around resilience? It's such a multifaceted question.
Right.
And so the first thing that I would say is, it's so easy for us to believe that we are alone. There are 70 billion people on this planet, and it's so easy to believe that people don't understand our experience or what we're going through.
Right.
And what a beautiful moment that we're in, where we get to experience this universally as a planetary humankind, right? On the one hand, the scale of it is overwhelming. The impact is, again, I'll say devastating. But the idea that we are reconnected to the idea of our connection and our intertwined humanity, and getting to understand that, if I get on a plane right now and decide I want to go somewhere, that could negatively impact not only me individually, but that could have important and powerful and far-reaching negative systemic impacts for other people, or people who are members of the vulnerable population, if I were to get sick and not know it and pass it on.
Yeah.
So I think we're in this moment now where our connection to one another and what that means and the power of the choices that we make, and those not being just choices for ourselves, but being choices that have far reaching impact. I think it's more clear than it's ever been.
Beautiful.
The second thing I can say is kind of a funny thing, which is, that game, 6 Degrees to Kevin Bacon.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So Kevin Bacon came up with I don't know if you saw the hashtag on social media called I Stay Home For.
I haven't seen that, but that's perfect.
So it's been a very popular hashtag that a number of, celebrities known, well-known and unknown people alike have used, like I Stay Home For, to really drive home the message, right? That what we can do, sort of our civic duty at this time is to stay home, is to shelter in place. And so, then we get to ask ourselves relative to connection, right?
Yeah.
Kevin Bacon came up with the I Stay Home For hashtag, and then we stay home. Does that mean we're all 1 degree from
exactly
now? Are we all much more connected than even we could have imagined? Right?
He's destroyed his own meme. It's like, no.
Yeah. Or just taught us that we were always directly, connected, which is beautiful. And then the third thing is that connection is actually the third practice of
right.
particularly resilient people. And so, for anyone who's, read the greats, like, Malcolm Gladwell and others, we know that in leadership and in life, right, having even one significant connection, right? Gallup tells us if we've got a close friend or even a best friend at work,
yeah,
our engagement scores, are significantly higher than they would be if we didn't have that connection.
That's right.
Malcolm Gladwell tells us that, even when we face difficulty, even if it's a desirable difficulty, as he talks about in David and Goliath, that when we have some kind of connection, a mentor, a teacher, a supportive parent or friend, we do dramatically better facing challenge than we would if we didn't have that connection. And what I found in my own research when I asked people about how they had effectively addressed a challenge to understand what those resilient practices or behavior is or are, people talked about the connection. So connection, in resilience, in my work, has two facets. One, it's the connection to ourselves, the ability to listen to ourselves, to spend time reflecting, to trust our gut, to be able to cultivate and hear that still small voice within. So that connection to ourselves and our own humanity is tremendously important. And then as we think about that systemically, relative to how do we connect outside of ourselves, to our friends, to our family, to our community. And the last thing that I'll say about this is, probably unsurprisingly, or maybe surprisingly, I've spent some time reading some articles about like survivalism recently,
yes.
like what do you do when the world comes to an end kind of thing. And not that I think the world's coming to an end, but,
right.
At this moment I've been curious. And we think, well, I won't tell you what you think or what anyone listening, what I think
yes.
about when I think about a survivalist, right, is like somebody who's got like a stockpile of canned goods and automatic weapons, who's like living out in the woods, off the grid by themselves. And actually what came up for me as I was reading these articles is that the people that are most successful in moments of, call it, upheaval within humanity are the people that have actually cultivated connections for themselves within the community, and they know how to get food, and they know what the distribution channels are, and they're supporting their neighbors and themselves. And so this idea of like the sort of lone wolf survivalist was actually a myth, and people who are connected to their communities are the ones that do best.
Beautiful. That's the perfect segue, because our time is up. Folks asking, there are people out there who want to know more about your work, your empirical research behind resilience, the 5 practices of particular resilient people. Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Taryn with a Y, Marie. You can also check out my website, which is resilience with a C, -leadership.com. And I'm also on other kind of traditional social channels, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter.
Perfect. Dr. Taryn Marie, it's been wonderful to talk to you. You're awesome. Thank you very much.
You're awesome. Thank you.
How to begin, start doing something that matters. At the heart of this book is the insight we unlock our greatness by working on the hard things. If you want to set a worthy goal, you can find out more and download bonuses at howtobegin.com.